have the either enviable or unenviable task of wrap up here. I want to basically frame what I'm going to talk about. I'm actually in higher ed, as you could tell by my introduction, so my frame is a little bit different. I also being, yes, I am one of those administrators. I have to worry about how we make things happen, how we pay for it, and how people are prepared to do their jobs. And so there's different kinds of maybe more social level issues that I have to deal with. So I want to share with you what I think about and what I think some of the challenges are that we're facing in higher ed and that we're facing as a nation. And I hope that you don't think when I'm all done that I've been too negative, but I really do feel that we need to have our eyes wide open. I come out of the technology business before I came into higher ed, and I love technology, but I also think that we have to be sober about how we look at things. I told my sister, who's here today, and my mother, that, yay mom, that the subtitle of my talk is actually Confessions of a Luddite, which I'm not really, but I do think that having a sense of caution and awareness a little bit. I also, in coming at the end, you get to hear everybody's assumptions and propositions, and I'm going to come out on the other end here. I don't think higher education's going away. It's a 1,000-year-old institution. It has survived the test of time. It will change, it must change, but I don't believe that, that it's going to be going away anytime soon. But there are great promises of this new age. I don't think you could open up a newspaper, turn on the news, go to your kids' schools and not see that there's great, great promise. And that the revolution is coming, and I think we do need to embrace it. A lot of it is driven by the fact that we have a lot of problems in education. It costs too much. I mean, you're all mostly dealing with public schools. In my business, and I'm in private higher ed, we are always getting hit. You cost too much, debt is too high, how are students going to be expected to pay for this? And I resonate with all that. And then we are also, people voluntarily go to college and they voluntarily complete. I don't know how many of you know this, but only 55% of the young people that start college finish. I live with that, I own that, and that's the kind of thing that we have to think about. It's those completion rates and how long it takes them to graduate, because the longer it takes, the more it costs. So these are things that we have to. And then what you all deal with in K through 12 is also, are they learning? What are they learning? Are they learning the right things? And so it's all of this that we're dealing with. And increasingly, we believe technology, or we're told technology is going to help us solve it. And I think it will, but I think we can't give up the human element. We see all kinds of predictions. Education will be free. There'll be adaptive systems, and every student can learn at their own pace and learn just what they need. So, again, we won't need teachers. We have these networks that bring all kinds of information from around the world in all forms to us, wherever we need it, whenever we need it, and through whatever device that we need it. And that's a wonderful thing. You know, higher ed's not in a vacuum. We can't choose to do things differently, the sage on the stage, which I'm doing with you today, although I'm certainly wired for action. We certainly have to think about what society is doing, and we need to be a part of it. We can't, well, and for years, higher ed actually did say we're going to do things differently. I will tell you today, I do not have that option, and my colleagues around the country don't have that option. We know, for example, that there's going to be the next generation 5G. I'm not a network expert, but I'm told it's going to be 100 times faster and 100 more devices. Hundreds of more devices that are going to connect. I mean, I'm reading about smart doorknobs. I don't even want to think about what that means. But I have to think about that because when we're fitting out our classrooms, our libraries, our study areas, our labs, we have to take all of that into consideration, and the change is daunting. But change we must. When I think about the beauty of all this, I think about those people who couldn't maybe otherwise have an education. Those people, because they're at a distance, they're homebound, they have certain, they're differently abled. So I do believe that technology can help in that way. And that's what makes what we're going through right now a new industrial revolution, if you will. It's the information revolution, the digital revolution, and it's what our children and grandchildren are going to be living through. But for higher ed, it's disruptive, it's causing great consternation, and we certainly can't ignore it. And I will tell you, it's something I think about every day that I go to work. So you say to me, you know, Concetta, faster, better, more, what's wrong with that? How can that not be good for education? We think of something like MOOCs, which we just heard about, the massive open online courses. Interesting name, isn't it? Nathan Hardin, we call him author, but he's also a futurist and an iconoclast. You can't do the kind of work he does without challenging the very nature of how we live every day. And he says things that I need to think about. He says, you know, residential college campuses are a thing of the past. They're expensive, they're going to be obsolete. The bachelor's degree, who needs it? We won't have degrees. And they're going to be irrelevant. And everybody's going to get their degree from Harvard or Stanford or MIT. Increasingly, they are also what we're calling the post-traditional student. They're over 25, they're working, they're going part-time, they have family responsibilities. And the flipped classroom, let me tell you, it doesn't work for them. We've found that if only they had the time to do the work ahead of time, they're barely able to get to class. We implemented something that we learned a lot from it. It was a Math Emporium style model. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but basically the students come into a lab-like setting, they learn from themselves, they learn from each other, they repeat, it's adaptive learning tools. And we found the students were saying, but when does the teacher talk? They actually want to hear from the teacher. So I think, you know what's going to happen? We're going to balance it. I don't think there's one answer that's right or wrong, that you're going to throw one thing out because something else is coming in. But I also want to say that I do think there's value in everyone having access to the same resources. And that's going to be the challenge for us. I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But if we can all actually get to that same star professor at MIT, if we can all actually get access to that wonderful technology, I think that is going to make the difference. I think we also have to think about where our students are coming from and who they are and how they learn. And Rebecca Schulman from Slate Magazine, she's written a book called Schadenfreude, a love story. I found that out about, I said, I gotta read that book. It just sounds very interesting to me. But she also has a lot to say about technology. And what she said was basically, many students, including these students at San Jose State, which is also a minority-serving, diverse public institution, weren't ready for that kind of impersonal education environment. So we have to think about how are we going to reach those students who maybe aren't ready for that environment. She said when we do that, we think we're helping them out, but they end up feeling alienated, annoyed, and anonymous. So I think that's the other side of it that we have to keep in mind when we look at this. I think that successful education needs personal interaction and it needs accountability at the level of the classroom and at the level of the institution. And as the provost, I take that accountability very seriously. So all of this, and gloom and doom, and I don't mean to be that way, there is a role for the teacher, and I think we want to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to go back to an old friend, a very old friend. John Henry Newman speaks about teaching in some interesting ways, a theologian and an author, and he talks about the university in 1854. And he says, you can learn yourself, right? That's essentially what he's saying here, by books at home, but the detail, the color, the tone, the air, the life which makes it live in us, you must learn that from those in whom it lives already. And I think we all remember those experiences that changed us when we decided who we wanted, what did we want to do when we grew up, and what we wanted to study. And we got that from somebody else, a young person. My sister had given me a lovely little quote about, in this tsunami of information, librarians are the ones with the swimmies or something, they give you swimmies. I think in many ways that's what, as teachers, we have to teach them how to learn and how to discern. I think discerning is because it's not a matter of delivering to people. Then what do they do with it when they get there? And that's one of the things that we can do as teachers. Learn how to learn and learn how to discern. But I also think the one thing that I love the most is when we can inspire and engage. Those are the days when anyone who's been in a classroom knows you feel like a rock star. When the students have they're clapping, they're coming up to you after, this is just like a lecture, holy moly. And it feels great and you know you've made a difference. And I don't think we want to lose that. So we're going to have to figure out how to incorporate that. And I know when I was in the classroom more, and I would always get the lovely required introductory theory class to 300, that kind of thing. And so you had to figure out how to make it live. And there were ways to do it. And I think a lot of it was combining different activities and modalities and exercises and media. So I think it all works together. But what I'm here to say is let's not throw the lecture away. The other thing I wanted to talk about as an aside, because it's just something that's on my mind a lot lately. I don't know how many of you have heard about this wonderful book called Decoding the Disciplines. It's by Pace and Middendorf. And they talk about teaching as an intellectual inquiry that takes advantage of disciplinary thinking. So those of you may have seen when I was introduced, I smiled when history was mentioned. I was a historian, and I was a historian first and foremost, and I have never lost that. And I'll never forget that moment when I decided that I was going to study history. And what a teacher does, and I remember that Western Civ class. I giving away my age, but paper chase, Watergate. I was gonna go to law school. This was me, and I wasn't feeling it. I think, and that's when I broke my mother's heart. I think when I decided not to go to law school. But anyway, I went to a Western Civ class because a friend of mine said, I'm really liking this history stuff. So I went, and that was it. I would run to that class because that teacher brought it to life for me in a way that nothing else could. And I have never, ever looked back. So what you do as a teacher, though, then is teach the students how to think in that discipline. And I remember reading the section of this book on how you learn to be an historian. And they describe perfectly, it's that first time where you're looking at all these journal articles and you're trying to write that term paper. And you're thinking, holy moly, how am I going to make sense of this morass of information? But you read, and you sift, and you find common threads, and you find evidence to support theories that you're building. No, that theory doesn't work, I'm gonna go back. And then they described my journey, how I became a historian. And that's why I think we as teachers don't even understand how we do these things. So if you're a scientist or a mathematician or a musician, you probably aren't even thinking about how you came to be what you are so that you can teach it to others. And I think that's going to be very important for us. We cannot lose that art of Christopher Martin at Caltech, an engineer, said, lectures are an intellectual journey at the speed of thought. So if you do it well, that's what it is. It's a performance. That was the other thing. When I came out of Bell Labs and I went into higher ed, the seminars, I was not worried about the lectures. Holy moly, I had to get in front of people and actually perform. But performance does some very important things. They said it's like creating, magic. It's something from nothing, right before students' eyes. It's creating magic for them. It's helping them, you're modeling for them how the art of argumentation as well as critical thinking. And the passion. I'll never forget one of my teaching evaluations says, boy, she can make a boring subject pretty interesting. So thank you very much. But that's the important thing that you need to do. You need to, your excitement needs to come across to the student. Because I don't think any one teacher is interchangeable with another. We all have different skill sets, as my colleagues who preceded me said, but we also have different passions and our brains also work differently. So I think we need to play to those strengths. Oh, we don't want to go that far. Okay, the way forward. This has been talked about today, and this is one of the joys of actually doing wrap-up. The way forward really does include the student in the journey. They will be makers. They will be part of creating their own knowledge. They will not only identify the problems, they will find the solutions. And that, to me, is the most exciting role that we can play. It's back to being that Sherpa rather than that sage, where we're helping the students along that journey. Joshua Kim at Dartmouth says it in an even more compelling way. He says, in the age of information abundance and ever smarter computers, the only hedge against unemployment is going to be the ability to create. And that's what we need to help our students do, learn how to create. Now, what he says is, we can't do that through the lecture. We're going to have to find other ways to make it possible for students to learn. But he does say one thing, and again, this is the administrator in me talking. Seminars are expensive. Labs are expensive. Collaborative learning spaces are expensive. And he says increasingly those forms of education are found in elite colleges, not in the large public institutions that many of us have either attended or must teach in. So what I think about as an educator, as an administrator, and frankly as a citizen, is how we're going to make this happen for everybody. I must say that I see the positive and the negatives and anything. The thing about technology is it ends up solving its own problems. And one of the things about technology that we're seeing is every time it seems to get more expensive than you can afford, it gets cheaper and smaller. And so I have this belief that we will eventually be able to get there. But the last point I really want to make to all of you, and this is an appeal, we can't let the people that we think are the experts tell us what the solutions are going to be. We can't let them tell us what the next big thing is. I think we have, every one of us in this room, every one of us has the ability to discern for ourselves what the real opportunities and possibilities are. And we have to engage in that discussion. I think you all being here today is an example of that. You care about how your children and your neighbors and your grandchildren are being educated. You have to be part of the dialogue, because otherwise we're going to be driven by really a commercialized kind of environment for technology and education. So we as educators, we as citizens, we as parents, we need to own that discussion, and I really commend you all for being here today. Thank you very much.